that's how we recover. It's not only like detaching ourselves from, the substance or, the habit or whatever you're addicted to. It's also detaching yourself from the shame attributed to using, but usually there's something else that really brings you shame that you're holding on to underlying all of that.
Hello, welcome to Recovery Demystified, a show where we explore our relationship to substances from a radical, non-religious, and empowering lens. Our sobriety is not a purity contract. It is an invitation to become curious about ourselves and find our own unique paths to growth and healing. If you've been questioning the role of alcohol or drugs in your life and haven't found the resources that you need, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello, welcome back to Recovery Demystified. My name is Early. I'm so happy to have y'all here today. Today, I'm really excited to share an interview with y'all from Adam, and we met each other in the CCAR Recovery Coach Professional training that we both attended, and I really enjoyed that training, and I made a lot of great connections with folks from it, and after it was over, Adam reached out and asked if he could come on the show. And I said, definitely. We all got to know each other pretty well during that week. And I was really excited to hear his story. And there's a lot of things that I found to be really relatable in it. He talks about in the beginning as a kid feeling different, and then eventually substances like dampening down that feeling and allowing for him to connect with other people. And this is a story arc that we've heard before. I feel like a lot of us that end up getting addictions as young adults, it starts with that feeling of alienation and feeling different, and then knowing that this substance can both numb that feeling out and allow us to connect to other people in this way that we so desperately need. And also he talks about a feeling of deep shame and it being like the chicken or the egg. Did the alcohol cause the shame, or did the shame cause the alcohol use? But in reality, it's sort of like they're just there exacerbating each other. And I'm really grateful that he came on the show to talk about his struggles with that in particular. And there's this really beautiful nugget that he introduced me to during his story, which was keeping small promises to yourself. And I'm a big believer that making tiny changes and learning to trust ourselves is a really strong foundation for building our recovery. And he just explains this in a way that I'd never really heard before. And I actually wrote it down when he was talking, keeping small promises to yourself. A lot of times in our addiction, we have this internal argument inside of our heads, and we make promises to ourselves and we let ourselves down, and it adds further to that feeling of shame. And when we're able to do little things, like Adam talks about making his bed, when we're able to do little things like drink water or make our bed and keep these small promises to ourselves, then that is like a really important foundation to build our recovery on. And it's setting us up for success to be able to do little things and succeed at them and foster an environment where we are able to learn how to trust ourselves again. And yeah, I'm just really grateful that Adam reached out to come on the show. I think that his story is really important. And yeah, he's one of those people that really, really got into the dark depths of alcohol use and just made such a beautiful life in his recovery, learning to find his purpose and then engaging with other people who are also working to find their purpose and using that pain and recreating it into something that is a healing force in society. And yeah, I just think that is it's a beautiful way to take something really difficult and hurtful and something that almost killed him, and then turn it out back into the world and use it to bring people together and kudos to you, Adam, for doing the work and being a healing force in society. And I guess I just want to throw out there that a Patreon member recently reached out to me and suggested that I do a listener questions episode. So I'm super open to that. I mean, usually I just talk about whatever I want to talk about, but this podcast isn't for me, it's for y'all. So if you have questions for me, you can send an email to info@recoverydemystified.com and let me know your question there. And speaking of the Patreon, I'm super grateful to the handful of Patreon members that I've got signed up, and it is definitely my goal to have this podcast be listener supported. So a great way to do that is to bop on over to that Patreon. The lowest tier there is just $3 a month. So for freaking less than a cup of coffee, I'm not even sure you can get gas station coffee for $3 anymore, but for less than a cup of coffee, you can support this work, and I would just be immensely grateful. And yeah, stoked that you're here today. If you're going through a hard time, I see you. I feel you. You're doing a great job, and it fucking gets better. Keep your head up, keep doing the work, and you will wake up one day and be so surprised at how amazing your future is. And yeah, I'm just really proud of everyone for surviving, and it's not always easy, but if you're suffering today, I see you. You're doing a great job. You can do this. Without further ado, here's my interview with Adam. Hello, Adam. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Will you start by introducing yourself to the audience? Let them know your pronouns and just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Adam Vora. My pronouns are he, him, and I live in Fairfield, Connecticut, based up here in the Northeast. And currently, I also am the host of a podcast called the Finding Purpose Podcast. But in addition to that, I am a recovery coach who works one-on-one with clients. And I, really like to stay connected with my community here locally, and working with a magazine called the Greenwich Lifestyle Magazine. And that's pretty much me in a nutshell for what I'm currently doing. I am a man in recovery. My sobriety date is August 4th, 2022. And yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. Adam and I met in the CCAR Recovery Coach Training Program, which I actually really loved. I was surprised at how aligned I felt with the type of things that they were teaching us. And I made a lot of good connections in that class too. There was so many people that were just like in recovery and really passionate about the work that they were doing. So yeah. What was your take on that class?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I mean, I think the group that we had was really great. And I reached out to a bunch of people there, and then, I went on and did the spirituality class, which I really enjoyed. And I mean, it was just like a lot of really useful information in regards to how to approach clients. But the only improvement I would say is, a lot of the mocks. I think when you're in a setting like that and you're doing mocks, they're not realistic, right? Because, you're in a real life setting, you'd have a lot more context to the person, to the situation they're in, to their history. But, at the end of the day, getting the reps in and getting the knowledge was like super, super beneficial for me. And I really think it's going to just make me a better, not only person in my own recovery, but like able to help more people in a better way.
Yeah, it's always kind of awkward, like when you're learning something new and they're like, now go pretend with each other. And you're like, okay, we're going to pretend. Yeah, it's definitely a little odd, but it's always good practice. So we're here to talk about your story with addiction and recovery. So I'm curious what it was like for you to be a little kid, maybe some of your first encounters with substances, when things got bad, and then ultimately how you got into recovery. So yeah, let's just start wherever you'd like.
Yeah, no, totally. So I grew up in New Fairfield, Connecticut, which is like northern Fairfield County, about like an hour and a half away from New York City, right? And, my family's originally from Philly. My younger years, we spent like in the like Philadelphia suburbs, but for all intents and purposes, I grew up in Connecticut, right? And so moved there when we were like 4, and I went to Jewish day school for K through 5th grade, right? And the thing that like now that I've really had a chance to kind of like do the work and peel back the layers, is going back to when I first started to feel like I was different. And for me, it was at a very young age, right? Like I'm brown. I mean, can't hide that. And, and I'm Sephardic Jewish. And, we were in a school full of, just like white Ashkenazi Jews. And so right from the jump, I always, like stuck out. And, I think I was very self-aware of it growing up, but, just kind of bumped along and did whatever I could to feel better. And you're at that age, like you really just try to do your best to be normal, right? And, me and my sister would eventually go to public schools. We went to from 6th grade. And here's another arena that I'm thrown into where, everybody already has their friends. They've been in school with each other for like, their entire childhood. Once again, like I was kind of like an outsider getting thrust into like a new environment. And I was hyper conscious of that. And I didn't know what to do. In full intents and purposes, like I was a good kid. My dad's Indian, my mom's Persian and Jewish. My dad worked for IBM for 40 years, provided a really good life for me and my sister. But I always had that underlying feeling of feeling different, trying to fit in, the whole nine, right? And, guess that's normal for any kid. But now that I look at it, it really, defined a lot of things for me. One of the things, like when I like to talk about like, my story, and I think it's especially useful when it comes to people in recovery, is to like, I kind of identify the major turning points in your life that you now are able to look back on and, really, launch your life in a different trajectory. So one of the major things that happened to me, and now I know happened for me, was, when I was 13, me and my sister found out we were adopted. It's funny because, like we looked like our parents, like they adopted us from India, but they never told us, right? That was a major turning point for me because I already felt different. Now I was told that I am different. And when I confronted my parents about it, they were like, we didn't want people to look at you guys differently. People look at people who are adopted differently. So now I'm confirmed to be different. So I don't think it was a coincidence that like shortly thereafter I discovered alcohol. I was playing football. I was on this football team, like Pop Warner football, and went to a party. People were drinking. Boom. Like that was my first taste of alcohol. I don't think that was the first time I got drunk, but, like slowly and steadily, I started to kind of invade my dad's liquor cabinet with my friends when they slept over. Got drunk a couple of times in the living room after everyone fell asleep. But, the most notable thing for me was 8th grade dance, showing up, wasted, boom, getting in trouble right away. It's crazy because, I faced consequences the first time I really, really got drunk, right? And that should have been a red flag. And, my story really is me just running amok and just ignoring every single red flag along the way. I think that's, like a lot of people's story in recovery. But for me, when I started drinking, the noise in my head started to quiet. And it was something that brought me together and made me feel part of. And, like I ran with it. And, like anything else, like addiction does, it progresses. And started drinking more. Marijuana was part of my story, but it wasn't really for me. Drinking is the thing that brought me to my knees.
I'm curious about those feelings of alienation when you were a kid. And I know you said you feel like that happens to everyone, but I feel like it happens to some of us to a greater extent. And it does lead down the road to us taking desperate measures to try to be able to fit in with people. And it can be extremely painful to feel like an outcast as a kid because it's so normal for humans to just want to be accepted. And that part of your story really resonates with me because I also felt very alienated as a child. And I guess I'm curious, when your parents told you that you were adopted, did it feel like a relief, like, oh, these feelings make sense to me now? Or did it sort of exacerbate those feelings of alienation?
So in regards to like the feeling of alienation, it wasn't like a feeling of alienation. It was just like an acknowledgement that I was different. Like it was just this like underlying voice, like continuing to tell me that I'm different. I stand out different, and I define different as less than. So, you know, I'm different, I'm less than, I'm different, I'm less than. Growing up like with that being like my internal monologue, you know, looking for different avenues to like make up for it. There weren't really any like until I would discover alcohol, but like that you know, when I found out we were adopted, it wasn't that they told us. So my sister found adoption papers and she told me, you know, I think this was like it was like May of like 1998 ish, I think. So like I was like, Amber, you're full of shit. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm you know, like you're
You're
you know,
good.
you're,
Yeah, you can say
I
whatever
don't
you
know what
want.
you're talking about. Oh, okay. You know, yeah. So I was basically Amber, you're full of shit. Like that's not true. You know, even though like she showed them to me and I knew it was true. So there was like a period of denial that I had for a little bit. And then, you know, after that, me and her would like huddle up and be like, when are we going to tell them? When are we going to ask them? When are we going to have this conversation? And I would always be like, we'd put it off. And then there was this one day that we were in the car and me and my sister were bickering. And then I just blurted it out. And I just like dropped a bomb on my poor mother. She was the only one in the car. And when we got home, they were like, all right, like, let's sit down and have a conversation. That during that conversation is when they were like, people would look at you differently. I guess the immediate feelings for me, like I was immediately angry. I felt like really, really deceived. And I felt, it wasn't like one of those moments where you're like, oh my God, like, I don't know who I am. But it was more so like anger, you know, anger. That's the feeling that I think underlies my addiction. And it's the emotion that I've worked the hardest to be able to really regulate, frankly, because I do realize that anger drove a lot of the things that would happen in the future. But anger was definitely the thing that I felt the most. But as the years progressed, I also understood that my parents felt guilt. And I also understood that I can play to their guilt and pretty much wrap them around my finger and get whatever I want, because no matter how bad I messed up, that guilt was so large in them, I knew they would bail me out of whatever problems I got into. And I played that card for like, you know, at least the next 20 years, you know. But yeah, you know, like that was just like, you know, like I think about like that moment, and I've done a lot of work with that. And, you know, there's this doctor who, her name is Dr. Tian Deaton, and she does sociometric training. And I did sociometric, a workshop with her. And it was an opportunity for me to really confront my 13-year-old self in that moment. And what would I say to that person and to young me? And, you know, one of the things that I said that I would say to him is, like, you're loved, bro. Like, you are loved. Like, this is not the end of the world. You were wanted, you know? You're wanted. People don't adopt kids if they're not wanted. Like, really just don't let this be the reason that you get in your own way. That's something that I finally, like, obviously I worked it out. But for a long time, I held on to a resentment, particularly towards my father over this, because he is, you know, Indian immigrant, somewhat narcissistic, my road to the highway kind of guy. And, you know, in the back of my head, I knew it was like him who was just like, you know, like, let's just let it ride. We don't need to tell them, blah, blah. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a joint decision. But I did also get an apology from my mom prior to her passing in 2013.
Yeah, I'm sure it felt really important to be able to hear that apology. And to me, it makes sense, especially at that age. It must have felt so disempowering to have such an important part of your life held from you. And then the only way you can kind of get that power back is to exert it in any way you can, which it sounds like it was you holding it over your parents whenever possible. And to me, that makes sense because, yeah, that feeling of disempowerment can be so painful. And then you just tried to get it back however you could. I'm curious, obviously you don't know about the history of your birth family, but was there any addiction around you growing up from your adopted family or any other adults in your life?
No, not at all. Which is kind of crazy. Like, my parents barely drink. I think I've seen my dad drunk a little more than my mom. I think I've maybe seen my mom drunk once, and it was like at a wedding. And my sister doesn't really drink. Our family weren't drinkers. They just weren't. They were, you know, a glass of wine with dinner type of people. So that's another thing where it was like that black sheep syndrome, right? I grew up, I continued to get into trouble. Like everything else, you get into kid trouble, cool. You get into grown-up trouble, yeah. Grown-up trouble is a little more serious. And I always viewed myself as that black sheep, right? Because for the most part, like my entire side, my entire family, like my dad has a PhD, like pretty much everyone's like well-educated, they're relatively successful. They all kind of went through that like traditional playbook, like go to college, get married, buy a house, have kids, get them bar mitzvah. Me, not so much.
I'm curious what prompted you to take that first drink? Like what was going through your head? Did you know what alcohol was going to do to you, or was it just a peer pressure kind of thing? What was your thought about what was going to happen when you were presented with the opportunity to have your first drink?
Curiosity probably drove it first, but then afterwards it was just like, this feels great. The feeling was great. Like it wasn't like an I have arrived moment like they say. It was more just like the noise was quieter. There was joy in the beginning, like felt good. But also the camaraderie it brought after. I'd always do it with a friend. So for me, like that first drink really was, now I understand how significant a first drink is. But if I really think about it, that first drink was just like not as significant as, everything that happened afterwards, right? Like it was just more like felt good. I wanted to feel good. And I just continued to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It's like when taking a drink takes away some of that discomfort and it makes you feel good. To me, I'm like, no wonder people get addictions. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So what happened after that? How were the rest of your teenage years?
Well, I mean, I barely got made through high school. I would drink throughout high school. I'd get suspended. I think I went from being this stereotypical, honestly, Indian nerdy kid to becoming like the kid that like wasn't invited to parties that parents knew about, like just kind of like one of the bad kids, right? So, I'd graduate high school barely between all my suspensions and, unexcused absences. I managed to get a diploma. I ended up going to UMass Amherst for about 2.5 years. I did not end up graduating from UMass Amherst because, that was when I was really allowed to drink on my own terms, whenever I wanted. And that's when it really started to take off. And that's when I really started to get in trouble. Like my story, I've gotten, multiple DUIs throughout. And, oftentimes the cycle was get a DUI, end up going to AA and IOP and, all that, wait till things got better. And then eventually I'd relapse, that's really what it was. I think it was like a little bit after high school, me and my best friend got caught and we went to like an AA meeting, right? And, we just like sat in the back and like, we were just like joking around and, it's crazy because there were some things that I remember from that meeting though, just like the people, like I remember like clear visuals of just like the musty room and like the smell of the coffee and stuff like that. But other than that, I didn't retain anything, right? And then, I would end up like getting in trouble and having to, like actually mandated like IOPs. And, the one thing for me is like, that I like acknowledge now is like me being like in and out of like different rehabs and like going to all these different institutions. It's like, you can't forget the things that you hear, right? You like they say like, going to AA or doing all these different things, like messes up your drinking. It's funny because like there were moments like after, I had relapsed where I'd like be drinking alone and like thinking about like, I know what I need to do to get better. Right. But I was just so scared and so angry. The actual prospect of changing, like, fuck that. Right.
Was the main force behind your drinking the whole time the anger that you're talking about?
That's a good question. I think anger was like the underlying emotion, right? I think it was like the foundation for the behaviors, at the end of the day. I think that partnered with shame was the real reason why I drank. I think shame and addiction live together. It's like kind of what first came, the chicken and the egg. Did the addiction come, then the shame come, or then the addiction? At the end of the day, I think that I lived being in a very traditional immigrant house. Shame is a weapon that you use to get people to do what you want, right? So like there's these so much like, these quote unquote prerequisites for just like what you deserve. And like in mine, it was like doctor, lawyer, A's only, stuff like that, right? And anything short of that would light some shame inside of me. So I don't think it was anger as much as shame was really like what drove me to drink. And I think that's like with a lot of alcoholics. I don't think I've ever met an alcoholic or an addict who didn't carry a level of shame about something that they were doing. I think that's like a lot about that. That's how we recover. It's not only like detaching ourselves from, the substance or, the habit or whatever you're addicted to. It's also detaching yourself from the shame attributed to using, but usually there's something else that really brings you shame that you're holding on to underlying all of that. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I feel like shame is like a seed that's in our brain and it gets watered at some point by something in our childhood, and then the addiction starts to happen, and the addiction is like the watering can being poured on the seedling and the little plant, and just keeps growing and growing and growing. And I definitely also dealt with a lot of deep shame in my addiction. So I think that makes perfect sense to me. I'm curious what age you were when you got your first DUI, and also what age you were when you started questioning if alcohol was benefiting you.
I mean, I got my first DUI, I think, when I was like 18, 19 years old. It was the summer after senior year. My friend had already moved up to Ithaca College. She was going to college there. I drove out there, got wasted, and decided to like drive to like another friend who was going to Cornell. And ended up like crossing town, crashing car. That was the first one. It was crazy. I had to take like a 9-hour bus ride back home without the car. My family was all on vacation. And I think it was like the first time that my parents like were really, really worried, right? I think it was like the first time that like they were like, oh shit, this is a big problem, And for me, the second question was like, when did I find out like that it was a problem?
Yeah, when did you start questioning like if this is really working for you or not?
Well, I knew from the first time that I got like really drunk, got in trouble at the 8th grade dance, that I just opened up a can of worms. I knew that this was dangerous for me. I knew it, but it made me feel less shameful, right? It made me not have to feel at all, frankly. And I think the first time I got in trouble, as messed up as it was, like getting the DUI, I already knew my parents would like, figure this out, together we would figure this out. At the end of the day, like I was always like kind of charming, frankly. And, I knew that like, we'd get a lawyer, we'd do all these things, I'd get on the other side of it and things would get better. I mean, in those ensuing days, like that long ass bus ride, and then like you sit in your shame and you're like, oh my God, that's the end of the world. But I just knew that this happens and that's it, right? But then when I continued to kind of demonstrate that behavior and these things kept happening, I mean, that's exactly what happened. Early, at the same time, I'm also like, like I left college, I was working in restaurants, which are real great environments for alcoholics and addicts. You make a lot of money, you party harder at the night, and you have nothing to show for it in the morning. And, that was like the cycle. So I was putting myself in every opportunity to continue to feed my addiction, understanding that, like whatever consequences, like my ego was so big, I felt untouchable. And it was just like externally, I felt untouchable.
So you always kind of had those two parts of yourself, that cognitive dissonance sort of, where there was part of you that was like, yeah, this is going to cause some trouble, or this is causing trouble. And then another part of you that was like, well, it also is taking away the shame and we're going to continue on with this.
Yeah. It was just kind of like, I just need to get through this and then I can go back to living the way I was living. Like the things that were important to me when I was using, and I think about it now, are like the people, they say people and places and things and stuff like all the time. Like I'm thinking about like some of the things that were important to me, the people who were in my life, and like my God, like why was I prioritizing so many other things over myself, frankly?
What was it like the first time you tried to quit drinking, and how old were you?
I mean, the first time I truly tried to quit drinking, I think it was around, I want to say like 2010-ish. So how old have I been then? Hold on. Now I'm doing math. You make me do math. 24-ish.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. And it was shortly after DUI. I was with a girl too, and I thought I was in love. Ugh. And I had like crashed her car, we got a DUI, the whole nine. And, like that was when I was like, all right, like this is a problem. But I knew I could go to AA. I ended up going to AA and I went to an IOP and I did that. And like, I started to understand that this is a problem. I am, like I definitely have the disease of alcoholism and like I need to do something about it, right? Like I knew I had to do something about it. I knew I had a problem. I mean, I think after the first one, I knew I had a problem, but when I first made a conscious effort was this time. And I think I was able to string together maybe like 6-7 months. But like one thing that I heard early on, like I know your podcast like explores all different paths of recovery. AA is the one that I do use. But one of the first things I've heard was, listen, Adam, like, from what it sounds like, you're getting sober to get things back. It's consequence driven sobriety, right? Like you want a job back, you want a car back, you want a girl back, and that's your why, right? He was like, what you really need, and well, not what you really need, but like what works. And he was like, what I'm saying for myself personally is purpose driven sobriety. Like there needs to be a bigger purpose to why you're doing this, right? And he was absolutely right. Like I just wanted my life to get better. I would stop drinking, and once it got better, then I would control my drinking. And I say this, so I've said this before. Like, if I could write like a biography, like the title of the book would be "This Time Would Be Different." Because every time I got sober, I said that to myself. And every time I decided to pick up a drink again, I said that to myself, and thankfully this time it has been different. But that first time, really trying to get sober was all just to get shit back.
And that lasted about 6 or 7 months. What were you doing to try to work on the addiction and try to heal during those 6 or 7 months?
The bare minimum. I was like going to meetings and then, I don't know, like isolating. I was like going to meetings and just like being miserable. Like you're like, oh, like I can't call these people. Like, like I was isolating. Yeah. Like I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't really doing anything, if I was being honest. Like, like I was trying to find a job probably at the time. I was probably like trying to like text this girl back into my life. I was focusing on the wrong things, which makes sense because, I mean, she wasn't going to stop drinking.
So I think it happens a lot of time in early recovery where people use isolation. And I think that can be an important skill to get through the hump of like the very beginning when like going out into the world is just immensely triggering. But isolation definitely cannot be our only skill because we're human beings and we're bound to interact with each other at some point. So we have to move past that and find ways to be resilient. I also noticed you mentioned that word purpose, and that seems like your whole deal now. Like it's the title of your podcast. It seems like, was that the big linchpin moment? Was that the turning point in your life when that person told you that you had to find a purpose, or did that come later?
Oh, that totally came later. But that's something that like, I never forgot him saying that to me. And, like I want to talk about like just how I kind of view my recovery journey, because I view it as it was a 15-year mess of saying goodbye to a best friend, right? And it was very much me going through the 5 stages of grief over these 15 years. Like the first time, it was definitely denial, right? I was in complete denial. I was like, nope, this is just a one-time thing, blah, 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 right? Anger probably underlies everything. Second time, pissed off myself, relapse, blah, blah. There was a period of time when I was bargaining, right? Like we all bargain. Like I'm only going to drink white wine. I'm only going to drink on Saturdays. I'm not going to smoke weed anymore. I'm not going to buy Coke. Like all these things, right? That's bullshit, right? And then obviously the last part was really the depression component where, I was just, at that point, just beginning to get really sick and tired of being sick and tired, and very isolated. Like this was really towards the latter years, and the depression part for me lasted a very long time. My mom would pass away in 2013. My best friend committed suicide 3 years later. And like any good alcoholic, I use those tragedies as a way to justify my drinking, to invite pity from others, and to also justify my depressive state. And those last years, I was very much just like not present. You know what I mean? Like just like, even if there were bursts of sobriety, I was very detached from anyone. I wasn't seeking any connection. I definitely didn't process any grief. You know, when those things, when my mom died and my best friend committed suicide, and until this most recent time, but almost 4 years ago, when I had hit this wall. And, all of these consequences that I had endured was culminated with the doctor finally telling me that I would die if I continued to drink the way that I was drinking. My pancreas was like twice the size of what it should be. And that was my oh shit moment where like, I think the door to acceptance cracked.
That's a really scary thing to hear. And I feel like I hear things like that often with people where all of a sudden they're faced with their own mortality and then they realize how much they actually do want to live. Like previously, maybe people were in that depression or in sometimes even like suicidal ideation or just that sort of downward spiral. And then something happens where, yeah, you're faced with like, oh my God, like the consequences are here and they're extreme. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense that would be the moment where you're like, okay, it's now or never. Mm-hmm. And I also did want to touch on you saying that every time you went back, it was going to be different this time. And I also definitely experienced that to the point where I would experience the thing where I would say this is going to be different this time. And it got to the point where I would joke about it. I would start drinking again and I'd look around to the people around me and be like, yeah, but it's going to be different this time. So it's like, it's kind of fucking crazy how the writing is on the wall and we know exactly what's coming next. But something in us, that little wormy voice inside of our head is just like louder than anything else. I'm curious. Yeah. What happened after you found out that news about your pancreas from the doctor? What did you go through and what happened after that?
It's funny. I'm sitting in this doctor's office and he's telling me these things. And all I'm thinking about is the sleeve of nips that I have in the back of my car. And so, he's telling me this. My girlfriend is in the room too. She's just like, I'm surprised she was even there, to be frank. She's just like pissed off, as she should be. She's devastated. She's put up with a lot of this throughout the years. And so it's over. They give me some meds. They tell me, like this type of diet that I need to use and, whatever. They're like, I leave. I get in my car and I just reach into the back pocket of the passenger seat in the back. Just pull out the sleeve of nips and just crush them on the way home. And I tell that story because like that's where I was in my disease, right? In the moment, hearing that news, the only thing that I felt could calm me down, give me some emotional whatever, was more alcohol, when it's the exact thing that this doctor just told me would kill me. And the days after that were very dark. I continued to, do my usually it was like a sleeve of nips by noon. And then, I'd switch to vodka by noon, and then, I'd be blacked out by 5. That was usually, those days, that's what it was. So like that happened in around like May, June. And shortly after that, I would end up losing my job. I ended up totaling another car. And that is when shit got even darker. And my family was trying to figure out what they wanted to do. I was kind of just wanting to not go to jail, frankly. So I was like, oh, all right, I'll go get help. And I was like calling like rich cousins to see if they'd pay for rehab for me. And I finally decided to pick up my the phone and call my best friend Courtney, who is a recovery coach, companion, and whatnot, right? And so I give her a call and I'm like, I need help. And, this isn't the first time I called Courtney. I probably DM'd her like late night, like when I was just like drinking by myself, and, multiple times I had done that. And she finally was just like, yeah, like, are you serious this time, Adam? Like, what's going on? And I was like, yeah. And that, I think, was a moment of surrender, calling her. And, at that point, I just was like, all right, like, Courtney, like, let me know, like, and she flew me down to Beaufort, South Carolina, and that's where I got sober.
Did you go into an inpatient program at that time?
No, I went down to Beaufort. She flew me down. I stayed in this guest house behind her parents' house. That was like kind of just like, I really think it was like used to be slave quarters, to be honest with you. But there I was. It was like a room the size of this library room, and I started counting days. That's kind of where it all began, where I Beaufort, South Carolina. Yeah, so I'm in this guest house. It like totally was giving slave quarter vibes, but like that's where I got sober. Like I sat there, and that's like I just started. That's when I started counting days. And it's funny, like, do you remember your last drink?
No, not the exact last one. No, do you?
Yeah, it was at LaGuardia Airport, and I never drink martinis. But there was these women next to me drinking martinis, and I drank 2 dirty martinis with blue cheese stuffed olives. And those were my last 2 drinks in fucking LaGuardia. And yeah, and I got on that flight and flew down there. And it's so crazy because like I think about it where it's like, I do think surrender is really important when it comes to getting sober, and just kind of just like admitting that like decision making has led me to this point, right? What are your thoughts? I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
About surrender?
Like surrender, yeah.
I guess I would need a more specific question than that. What about surrendering?
But do you think surrender is a essential part of long-term recovery? Surrendering to the fact that you can no longer, this thing can no longer be in your life.
For some people, yes. I think for some people, the addiction gets to like such an extreme point that it just needs to be left behind absolutely forever. But based on a lot of the conversations that I've had with people and based on research data, there's a large percentage of people that return to controlled use of substances. For instance, this person, Hannah, that I had on the podcast, her story was in 3 parts because it was so like long and intense. And she was homeless. She was addicted to IV heroin for years and years and years and years. And she quit, and she's been working on her healing. And she's got to such a point with her healing that now when she gets prescription opiates from the doctor, she doesn't like how they make her feel. And she doesn't use the whole bottle. And she's in complete control, and it's just literally not a problem for her at all. I think for me personally in my life, if I thought that I could go to happy hour this afternoon and have a beer with my friends, that you'd have to pick me up from jail later, based on my own knowledge of myself and based on my own experience in my life. So I guess I would say that I don't know if I would use the word surrender. I guess that's just not, but I mean, I appreciate when other people use that and it's of benefit to them. So you felt like you surrendered in that guest cabin behind the house?
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like it was just like for years, this thing was just beating the shit out of me, right? If a human treated me the way that alcohol treated me, I wouldn't fuck with them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like when I look at it from that perspective, yeah, it was like I needed to just be like, all right, like I'm not fighting you anymore. Because it went from being a friendship to just like total dominance, right? And I just became a slave to it. But it was all that I knew. I think more often than not, we talk about how just like when alcohol is a solution to everything, that's probably when like you have a problem. And, understanding that I was towards the end, like really realized I was using alcohol to Band-Aid every emotion. You know what I mean? Like every single emotion. Like I was using drugs and alcohol to band-aid every single emotion, both positive and negative. And when I finally like put it down, it was freeing because I was just like, all right, like that moment of surrender was essential for me. Absolutely.
I guess the more I think about this surrender, when I practice surrender in my life, it's more to, you were talking about burying all of your emotions with substances. And first, I just want to extend some compassion to you and that experience that you went through, because it sounds like being at that point and feeling so out of control is like, that's a really fucking hard place to be. So I want to extend a lot of compassion to that whole 15 years that you went through all of that stuff. But when I understand surrender in my own life, it's to the experience of the emotions as they're happening, because I also would use alcohol just to suppress everything. And that's like the learning process in the brain, because it sounds like when you were really young and when I was really young, we learned that alcohol solved a problem for us. Though it created a lot more, part of our brain learned that it solved something. So of course we're going to reach out for that thing that provided relief to the pain. And now in my life, like if say I have like really big anxiety coming up, really big anxiety, and that's something I used to drink to suppress. I used to be like, oh, alcohol, it helps with my anxiety. I used to think that. Now I have really big anxiety come up and I practice surrendering to the experience of my emotions as they are, as they're coming. So yeah, I guess if I would use the word surrender in my life, it would be no longer suppressing difficult emotions. It would just be like allowing them to flow through me in a way that I didn't when I was in my addiction. I'm curious what happened after you were detoxed of alcohol in the guest cabin. What happened in your life after that?
Once that happens, I mean, like those few days, and like I want to like talk about those moments in the guest cabin, because you know, like one of the things that I think that like is often very much misconstrued is that like, all right, like, you know, like you put down alcohol and then like everything gets better and we live happily ever after, right? Like I think to, you know, non-addicts, right? And one of the things that I have grown to understand and actually grown to like really invite into my life is discomfort, because those were some of the most uncomfortable days of my life, those first 30 to 45 days, right? And they were lonely, and they were lonely in the sense that like I had isolated everybody from my life except for Courtney. I really only had whatever I was going to seek that could help me. For me, it was AA. So like I ended up going to this AA meeting downtown in Beaufort, connecting with a bunch of guys there. When I'm not with these people, I am by myself. And I do think that when you're trying to get sober and you are coming from a really difficult place where that your addiction brought you, like be prepared that it does sometimes get worse before it gets better, you know, and it's okay, because that's part of growth. And that's exactly how it was for me. This whole time, you know, like I still have like legal issues back north. You know, my family's not trusting me. My girlfriend's like, just like doesn't know what to do, is feeling hopeless. I'm sure there were moments where she was questioning whether she wanted to be in a relationship with me. And, you know, I was there by myself, you know, so those early days were like, all right, like what do I need to do on a daily basis to slowly get better, right? And I began to understand that like I was not living like a human being. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping well, the hygiene was questionable. So like, you know, just like starting with those things and just like, you know, I'm a big fan of like this guy, and his name's Ed Milet, and he talks about like, you know, just keeping small promises to yourself, right? And so I started writing a lot, and I started making to-do lists, and I started making gratitude lists, and I started to really just put a lot of my thoughts on paper, but also try to establish some non-negotiables, little things, right? Like making my bed. I never made my bed. You know, for me, making my bed was symbolic of just like getting a task done. For me, like it really came down to those little things. Like yeah, making your bed is like a little thing, but what it really was about just like getting a task done and trying to like build some self-confidence in myself. Like I had no faith in myself. And I think, you know, a lot of addicts reach that moment where they don't trust themselves. They don't have any self-confidence. They don't have any self-esteem. And they surely don't have any self-love. And I understood that if I keep keeping these small promises to myself, whether it's like making a bed, like getting to a meeting, eating 3 square meals, going to bed at a normal time, doing some reading, like those type of healthy habits, because I had to fill all my drinking time with things that I didn't, with things that I didn't do routinely. So I do think routine was a really important part of my recovery, particularly in the first year and a half, where I was just like really regimented to a point where I might have been overly regimented. I needed that to find myself again. I needed that to build self-confidence. And I needed that to start to love myself again.
Yeah, all that stuff's really relatable. And I totally agree that, and I wrote that down, keeping small promises to yourself. I've never heard it phrased like that, but I do think it's so important when we're learning to trust ourselves again in early recovery to do tiny achievable things, whether it is just making your bed, whether it's drinking water every day, just little stuff. And when we prove to ourselves that we can make these little accomplishments, that's when we can learn and build and grow. And I think sometimes people will quit drinking or quit drugs, and then they get that immediate pink cloud and they're like, okay, and now I'm going to go and take over the world. And when they can't take over the world immediately, it sort of beats them back down into that place where they think, oh, I'm a failure, and they start going into that shame again. So I think that's a really important point, and thank you for bringing that up, that doing little things and learning to be able to depend on ourselves is really, really important.
Yeah. And then, as you build that confidence, you can start really getting to know who you are, what you like, what you don't like, who you want to spend time with, who you don't want to spend time with. All of these things, I think it's so important to know, what makes us happy and what doesn't make us happy.
As you're building in your recovery, what happened after that? And I'm very curious when the purpose thing comes in.
So one of the things that I had to do was, I made a promise to myself that whatever I was doing, I'm going to do the opposite of what I used to do. And what I would normally have done was spend those 45 days, come back up north, find another restaurant job, boom, the thing goes on and on. I realized that working, the mindset that the early recovery wasn't the best time for me to jump back into a job that I knew could potentially jeopardize my recovery. So, I spent a long time looking for a new job, and I finally would end up working for an Equinox gym. It's like a luxury fitness gym. It's definitely overly bougie for a gym, to be honest with you. But whatever. I started working there. I started connecting a lot with the members there. They were all just very established professionals. A lot of them either living in the suburbs of the city and commuting into the city. And I just kind of started to observe just people who are high performers, right? And one of the things that I noticed about them was consistency, A, and B, when they talked about the things they cared about, it wasn't really about their wealth. They talked about family, and they talked about the work that they were doing in the community to give back, right? Whether it was with a nonprofit and, all these things. And that really struck me, these people had accomplished so many things in their life, but the things that they felt the most pride around was how they were helping others. And I realized that I survived everything I survived because I meant to help others. And that, to me, started this whole purpose journey where I wanted to figure out how, the best way to help people, right? I would connect a little bit after that with a friend who ran a public speaking seminar. And I started to talk publicly about my story. And, sharing things that I never really shared publicly, and just becoming really vulnerable about it. And when I did that, I saw that the shame, vulnerability is the kryptonite for shame. If you are sharing vulnerable things about yourself, shame doesn't have any oxygen. And the more I started to share, the more people would reach out to me or come out to me after I shared an event and be like, hey, listen, that really resonated with me. I have a cousin, or, there's a moment in my life that I felt that way. And, some of them were connecting with the actual, addiction component. And some of them were just connecting with the emotional roller coaster that, I was describing when I was speaking. And so therein would lied like the launch of my podcast, where I was like, listen, if this is such a freeing experience for me to be able to talk vulnerably about the things that I've went through and the feelings that I've been able to navigate, there's other people who have experienced similar situations, whether it's addiction related or not, where it brought them to a dark place and they had to overcome it. And on the other side of these events, you realize what's truly important. And it's usually family and helping other people. So I started having those conversations, and I really, really started to be intentional with like everything, with just like who I wanted to associate with myself with, how I wanted to like convey myself. And it took a lot of soul searching early because, one of the things in early recovery is it's like, like I threw a lot of things at the wall, saw what sticks, saw what made me feel good, saw what made me feel bad, and stuck with the things that were like, just like, really filling my cup. But helping and leaning into my purpose has always been one of them. And helping other people to live purposefully has been like an underlying thing that the whole brand's about, frankly.
Yeah, that's really amazing to hear. And I feel like it's so important, especially when we go through such deep pain in our lives, to be able to take it and transform it. I was just talking to someone recently about how there's post-traumatic stress disorder and then there's post-traumatic growth, where a lot of times after we've been through something difficult, we can come out and just be like a bigger version of ourselves. And connecting to other people and finding like those relationships and healing with other people because of our shared pain is such a beautiful and important part of humanity. And I wonder if that child part inside of yourself that felt so different is like getting some healing experiences from people being able to relate to you in those ways.
It's funny because I've done like some inner child work, and like I think now there is very still much of inner child in me that still feels less than, it feels like I shouldn't be in certain rooms that I get to be in. And the key for me has been just when those negative thoughts come into my head, is to reprogram them and check them immediately. Like, oh, like, what are you doing here? Oh no, I belong here. That's really important. And the child in me who, still like wants to make everyone happy and wants to be loved is there, but he's slowly learning that all he needs to worry about is that he loves himself. And, I try to educate him in that way through some of the spiritual work that I do and some of the, conversations that I have with people. And like, I think that when I do good things for other people, that's just kind of helping to reaffirm to him that, we're on the right track and you are worthy of the blessings that come your way, because that's really what it's all about. Like, we have all these prerequisites for worthiness. And at the end of the day, why can't you just be enough? And, like, I tell myself that, and sometimes I have to pause and tell myself that when I am having that moment of insecurity. I think I still got like a good amount of work to do when it comes to the inner child work, but I have the tools now to just kind of nip it in the butt when I'm like feeding into it, if that makes sense.
Totally. And it makes me think of Thich Nhat Hanh, who's like a Vietnamese Zen Buddhist, and he describes what you're doing as hammering the peg. So he talks about if there's a carpenter who has a rotten peg in the wood, which the rotten peg would be those thoughts of like, I don't belong here, I'm not worthy. You see the rotten peg and you take one that's not rotten and you hammer the rotten one out just immediately. So your new peg would be, no, I do belong here. Like I'm meant to be in this space. So I think that's a really important skill, just like nipping it in the bud, recognizing the thought and putting something different there immediately. I'm curious, was there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to get to?
I mean, we covered a lot, we really did. I mean, I think the thing that I think, because all right, so like I was listening to the last two episodes and I think one of they kind of alluded to just like spirituality and like having an interesting relationship with spirituality. And I want to talk a little bit about that because like it played such a key role for me. And I think there's a lot of people who struggle with the spirituality component like I've shared that I am, like a member of AA, but like, it's funny because I'm a member of AA, but like at the end of the day, like it's really more like I'm just like a more spiritual person, right? And what I mean by that is like I am not a religious person at all. I think religion is very much in mass, and it's like kind of just like a machine that is like available for everyone, while I more so have a relationship with my God, right? That is just for me, right? Like, and I think that's like having that has been really, really important. And it's like that he doesn't tell me what to do, like it's not like there's no like religious factor behind it. Because like, am I correct where it's like, like that is a difficult thing for people for some addicts to like wrap their head around. And like I know like people who, and I've had sponsees, and like I've had other people who just like don't want any of it. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, but I can be your tool. You know what I mean? Like whatever you need. But like I know like this like recovery, I feel like is very much a team sport, right?
Yeah, and your experience is your own. And if you have a spiritual relationship that is making you feel full and it's holding you up and it's a big part of your recovery, then that's for you. You know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with spirituality being a part of a person's recovery. And it can be a really important part of being a human being, to be connected to something that's bigger than ourselves. So I'm super in support of that. If it's a thing that's working and it helps you and it makes you feel full, Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. So was there anything else that you wanted to get to that we didn't get to touch on?
No, I think we had, this was a great conversation.
Yeah. I'm so happy that you were here. I usually end with the same two questions. And one is, what do you think people don't understand about addiction?
I think the thing they struggle with is the fact that this is a disease that tells you don't have it. And when there's nothing like it, like no other disease tells you don't have it. And the thing that sometimes, worries me is how sobriety is, quote unquote, trending, and where, because it's trending in the way where it's like, oh, like I don't drink, blah, blah, blah. I lost 20 pounds because I don't, these type of things. I don't want it to deter a struggling alcoholic from seeking help because it's been difficult for them and other people make it look easy. So like, that's something that like, I like really like to hone in on, that like, this is a hard thing. Getting clean, staying clean, and reprogramming your life. It's a hard task. I'm with anybody who's willing to embark on that.
Yeah. And comparison is the thief of joy. So looking at someone on the internet and thinking that because your journey is different than them, that there's something wrong with you is, it's a step in a more difficult direction. That's for sure. If you could speak to someone in the darkest days of their addiction, what would you say to them?
I would tell them that you don't need to be alone. You're not alone. And the pain can end if you wanted to.
Yep, you're definitely not alone. It can feel very, very, very lonely. But as soon as you reach out that hand to help, you'll be really surprised how many people are there ready to grab your hand and pull you out and put you in that guest cabin behind their house and let you detox. Yeah. So, all right. Well, it's been awesome talking to you, Adam. I'm so appreciative of your time, and thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Recovery Demystified. If you like what you heard, share it with a friend or rate and review us so we can reach a larger audience. Recovery Demystified is produced and edited by me, Early Brunner. Stevie Pettit made our logo. Our beautiful theme music is by Logan Bragg. And our social media manager is Kaylee Bausch. We are entirely supported by your generous donations as a 501c3 nonprofit. You can find a link to donate in the description. May you be happy and free, dear listener.